$4.02. That is what a gallon of gasoline costs the average American family tonight. A month ago, it was under $3. And the reason it changed, the reason your grocery bill changed, the reason the entire global economy is holding its breath right now, comes down to a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman that most people could not find on a map 6 weeks ago. I have spent the last few days turning this over in my mind, not as a commentator, but as someone who has personally managed military operations in the Middle East and lived with the consequences for decades afterward. I got things wrong. I will be the first to admit that. But I learned something in that job that applies directly to what we are watching unfold right now. When every exit a president can see leads to a different version of the same defeat, the decisions stop being about strategy and start being about survival. And that is exactly where this war has arrived. So stay with me. Here is what just happened. On Sunday, the 30th of March, the Wall Street Journal reported that the president privately told his own staff he would accept ending the war with Iran even if the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. Think about that. The most consequential energy corridor on the planet, 20 million barrels of crude flowing through it on any normal day, roughly a fifth of every drop of oil that moves by sea. And the White House quietly concluded it cannot guarantee reopening it within the timeline the president set for himself. The next morning, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood at the podium and confirmed it. She listed what the administration considers its core military goals: neutralizing Iran's naval fleet, dismantling its missile and drone capabilities, degrading its proxy networks, and blocking nuclear weapons development. Nowhere on that list was the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that has paralyzed global energy markets for over a month was removed from the definition of winning. That is not a minor adjustment. That is an entirely new war aim announced on live television while the old one was still bleeding out. And we need to talk about what Tehran constructed inside that waterway while Washington was focused on targets, because that is the part that changes everything. We will come back to it in detail. But first, understand the sequence. On the 31st of March, the president told reporters the entire operation could wrap up within 2 to 3 weeks. He said the principal military objectives are achievable without dragging the conflict out further. Then, just hours later, he got on Truth Social and told allied nations, and these are his words, to build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait, and just take it. He called France very unhelpful. He wrote that the United States will not be there to help anymore. Secretary of State Rubio tried to smooth it over, saying the Strait would reopen one way or another, either by Iranian compliance or through an international coalition. But strip the diplomacy away, and the picture is blunt. America initiated this campaign. Iran responded by sealing the most critical shipping lane on Earth. And now the country that started the fight is telling everyone else to go clean it up. Before we go further, thank you for being here. I mean that. And if you have not yet, please subscribe and give this video a like so I can keep doing this work for you. Now, most people think Iran just blocked the Strait of Hormuz the way it has been threatening to for 40 years. A brute force shutdown. Ships stopped, waterway sealed. End of story. In reality, what Tehran engineered is far more sophisticated and far more dangerous than a simple blockade. Iran did not merely close the strait, it redesigned it. It built a controlled transit system with geopolitical sorting, fee collection, and legislative architecture to make the whole arrangement permanent. Let me walk you through what that looks like, because this is the part most people are missing entirely. Before the war started on the 28th of February, somewhere between 100 and 110 commercial vessels crossed through Hormuz every single day. That represented roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil. Since Operation Epic Fury began, that volume has collapsed. Lloyd's List Intelligence recorded just 142 total crossings between the 1st and the 25th of March in the same window last year. That number was 2,652. One full month of wartime traffic barely matches what used to pass through in a single ordinary day. The International Energy Agency has described this as the largest disruption to global energy supply since the 1970s oil crisis. Some analysts say it exceeds even that. Here is what the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps constructed in that vacuum. Any vessel seeking passage now has to submit a complete application through IRGC connected intermediaries, full cargo manifest, full crew list, ownership documentation, final destination port. The IRGC reviews it. If they approve, the ship receives a coded authorization. An IRGC patrol boat then escorts the vessel along a rerouted channel, not the standard two-lane traffic separation scheme that runs through the center of the strait near Omani waters. A narrow corridor north of Larak Island, threading between two Iranian islands, hugging the Iranian coastline. Every single ship that transits now does so inside waters Tehran claims as sovereign territory. Let me tell you something. That routing was not an accident. It was designed to establish a legal and physical precedent for permanent Iranian jurisdiction. And the access rules are divided along geopolitical lines. Vessels flagged to China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan move through free of charge. Ships connected to the United States, Israel, or allied nations either pay an estimated $2 million per crossing, settled in Chinese yuan, or they are denied passage entirely. Lloyd's List confirmed at least 2 vessels have already paid. Iran's parliament, the Majlis, is actively drafting legislation to formalize this system into binding domestic law, not as a temporary wartime emergency measure, as a codified expression of sovereignty. Lawmaker Mohammad Reza Kochi told Iranian state media the parliament intends to establish permanent Iranian authority and oversight over the waterway while generating ongoing revenue through transit charges. Iran signed the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982 but never ratified it, and that gap is the legal foundation Tehran is now building on. Here is the honest truth about why this matters so much. At the reported toll rate and pre-war traffic volumes, that system would produce somewhere north of $600 million a month just from crude oil tankers. Factor in liquefied natural gas shipments, and the projection climbs past $800 million monthly. For context, Egypt typically earns between $700 and $800 million a month from the Suez Canal, an entirely man-made waterway that Egypt built and owns. Iran is constructing an equivalent revenue machine out of a natural strait that under international law no single country controls. That is not a wartime improvisation. That is a geopolitical restructuring. And towards the end, I am going to show you why the gap between what the president is saying publicly and what the Pentagon is doing operationally is the single most important fault line in this entire conflict. Now, I want to be fair. The military campaign has produced results. By most credible estimates, over 90% of Iran's major surface warships have been eliminated. Airfields, missile production sites, and nuclear-related facilities have been struck across the country. The administration says more than 8,000 targets have been hit. That is real. Nobody should pretend otherwise. But Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who took over after his father Ali Khamenei was killed early in the bombing campaign, used his first major public statement to declare that the leverage of Hormuz must continue. Tehran has added a condition to its ceasefire demands that did not exist before the war began: formal recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the strait. They took a wartime measure and turned it into a permanent territorial claim. That is not the behavior of a nation that feels defeated. Stay with me, because here is where things start to get complicated in a way that should concern every single one of us. While the president talks about departing within weeks, the Department of Defense is still pouring combat assets into the region. Reporting from Reuters and the Associated Press confirms that additional Marine Expeditionary Forces are en route. Roughly 2,500 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division have deployed into theater, and a third carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, is heading to reinforce the buildup. 2 carrier strike groups have already rotated through: the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, though the Ford withdrew to Split, Croatia on the 28th of March after an onboard fire the Pentagon characterized as non-combat related. Iranian-affiliated outlets instantly claimed credit for a successful strike. Central Command denied it. Regardless, the Ford is no longer in the fight. The amphibious assault ship USS Boxer is expected to arrive within 2 weeks, bringing the maximum ground force capability into theater. All told, nearly 7,000 additional combat troops are flowing into the Persian Gulf. That is not what a drawdown looks like. That is what a contingency escalation looks like. And the most discussed contingency is Karg Island. It sits roughly 15 miles off Iran's southern coast. Approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports flow through its processing facilities. The president himself told the Financial Times he could take the island. The force packages arriving in theater match exactly what you would need for an opposed amphibious seizure. Marines for the beach, airborne for rapid contested insertion, special operators for securing high-value nuclear materials. But CNN has reported that Iran is fortifying Karg with additional troops, layered air defenses, and physical obstacles. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf warned that if any regional government supports a landing operation, its vital infrastructure would face relentless, unceasing attacks. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis called the amphibious option extremely dangerous. The Royal United Services Institute in London assessed it would not be without significant casualties. And the Foundation for Defense of Democracies cautioned that holding an island under constant ballistic missile fire from the Iranian mainland just 15 miles away demands a massive, sustained defensive presence that cannot be assembled overnight. That is not a surgical raid. That is an open-ended occupation. And this president built his entire political identity on the promise that the era of endless Middle Eastern wars was finished. Now here is the dimension that is accelerating the desperation faster than any battlefield variable: the economic damage hitting American families right now. The national average gasoline price crossed $4.02 a gallon on the 31st of March. That is more than $1 above the pre-war average of roughly $2.97, a 35% jump in 32 days. Diesel has been worse, surging approximately 45% to around $5.45 per gallon. Diesel moves every truck, every freight train, every tractor, every piece of heavy equipment in this country. Those costs have not fully reached consumers yet. They are working their way through the supply chain. Over the next 60 to 90 days, you will see them in grocery prices, in shipping invoices, in utility bills. Brent crude settled above $118 per barrel for May delivery. Goldman Sachs and other major banks have warned that a prolonged Hormuz closure could push crude beyond $150, potentially approaching $200 a barrel, a level the global economy has never experienced. Governments responded with a record coordinated release of 400 million barrels from strategic petroleum reserves. That bought weeks. It did not buy a solution. The collateral damage keeps spreading. Qatar Energy has declared force majeure on certain liquefied natural gas contracts. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. Global helium supplies have been disrupted, affecting everything from medical imaging equipment to semiconductor manufacturing. Markets are pricing in slower growth, stickier inflation, and fewer interest rate cuts this year. And the political numbers reflect it. A Reuters Ipsos poll this week found the president's overall approval at 36%. Only 29% approved of his handling of the economy, the lowest economic rating of either of his terms and lower than any recorded for his predecessor. Roughly 61% of respondents actively disapproved of the war. A Pew Research Center survey found similar results, with 6 in 10 Americans saying the decision to strike Iran was wrong. About 2/3 said the country should end the conflict quickly, even if not all objectives are met. House Armed Services Chairman Mike Rogers told reporters there is frustration across party lines after classified Pentagon briefings left more questions than answers about troop commitments, endgame strategy, and overall cost. Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick said he was getting more information from news reports than from his own administration. All 435 House seats and 35 Senate seats face voters in November. And every single day that pump price sits above $4, the ground shifts underneath the governing party. So where does this end? I see 3 roads, and none of them are clean. The first path: declare the mission accomplished and leave with Hormuz still under Iranian management. Rubio is already laying the rhetorical groundwork. Netanyahu told Newsmax the campaign has exceeded its halfway point in terms of missions completed. The messaging is being shaped to claim success without the strait. But if that toll regime hardens into law, if gas stays elevated for months, if the global economy absorbs the hit, critics will label the entire campaign the costliest strategic miscalculation in a generation. Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, went on Fox News and said the country should finish the job and reopen the waterway. The second path: pass the problem to allies. The United Kingdom and France are reportedly assembling a coalition of up to 35 nations to secure the strait after hostilities conclude with frigates, escort vessels, and air defense. China and Pakistan have proposed their own 5-point plan for restoring regional stability. But this approach carries a fundamental credibility problem. America launched the war. America destabilized the waterway. And now America is asking the rest of the world to restore what it disrupted. Imagine you knock down your neighbor's fence, tell him it is none of his business, and then 3 weeks later ask him to come rebuild it for you. That is roughly what this looks like to every foreign ministry in Europe and Asia. The third path: escalate, take Karg Island, force the strait open with Marines and paratroopers under fire. The forces are assembling. The Boxer arrives soon, bringing maximum amphibious capacity. But the Pentagon's own estimates suggest a Hormuz reopening operation alone would require 4 to 6 additional weeks, pushing the war deep into May. American casualties would rise. The political consequences would be volcanic. And the president would own a ground war inside Iran, the precise scenario he swore his presidency would never produce. Tomorrow night, April the 2nd, the president addresses the nation on Iran. The White House postponed a planned trip to China until mid-May, which many interpret as a quiet deadline for concluding the conflict. The strategic petroleum reserves are draining. The Boxer is closing distance. The toll system is hardening into statute. Let me tell you something, and I mean this as somebody who has been on both sides of hard decisions. The United States sank most of Iran's navy. It destroyed airfields and missile factories and nuclear sites across the country. Billions spent. Thousands of targets struck. And after all of that firepower, Iran still holds the one thing that determines who has the upper hand: the narrow corridor of water between its coastline and Oman, through which 1/5 of the world's energy is supposed to move freely. The campaign was presented as decisive strength. The exit is being framed as strategic flexibility. But the strait tells the only story that energy markets, allied capitals, and American voters will remember. Whoever controls Hormuz controls the leverage. And at this moment, that is not the United States. We have gotten through hard stretches before, after Vietnam, after the chaos of the Second Iraq War. We course-corrected because ordinary citizens demanded answers, and held their representatives accountable. That is what has to happen now. Call your member of Congress. Demand a public vote on the scope and duration of this conflict. Pay attention. Stay engaged. Because the exits that get chosen in the next few weeks will shape American foreign policy and American gas prices and American credibility for years to come. And the people who make those choices need to know you are watching. Thank you for listening. I appreciate every one of you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe there is an exit here that looks like a genuine win? Or has this spiraled past the point of recovery? Let me know. God bless the United States of America.